this. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here. Have you all eaten your lunch? Are you ready to take a rest? Okay, so my name is Julius, and I'm a Java developer here in CACIB in the Mika project. Today, we're going to talk about Swagger, who claims to be the world's most famous API framework. Okay, I'm going to show you how easy it is to integrate Swagger documentation into your Java or .NET REST API applications. Yes, it's very easy. Apart from that, I'm going to talk about OpenAPI Specification, originally known as the Swagger Specification. This is the very core of this documentation. And I'm going to also talk about two different approaches to API development with sample case studies and the usage of Swagger tools in each example. Okay, first let's talk about the current ways of documenting our APIs. Who among you here loves to work on the documentation? I don't see any hands. But I hope after this lesson, you will be using this tool to easily document your REST API applications. Okay, we know very well as API developers that documentation is very essential to our consumers, right? So we have our best friends, Microsoft Word or Excel, always there to give us a hand on beautifying or creating a highly presentable documentation. But if your consumers are just developers seated beside you, I'm sure you won't bother opening this document. But if you are communicating with teams from other company, or especially you're not collocated with your teams, you will definitely need to provide a proper documentation. So you can send this document via email, or if you don't have a documentation, you can just list those endpoints, REST endpoints on your email and then send it to them. Okay, but when your API changes, when you have new endpoint defined or you have changed some parameter types, you will definitely update your documentation manually. And at a certain point, this task is forgotten and it frustrates you. So you might want to consider sending your release notes, which contains all the changes of your API indicated in each version section. And then send this to your consumers. Let them figure out what's going on your API. Or you can try Swagger. You have here your REST API. You just simply plug in your Swagger library, and it's done. But not only that, Swagger has a bunch of tools that allow you to do more than just documentation. We have Swagger Inspector that allows us to test and describe existing APIs. We have Swagger Editor, which allows us to easily manage our specs. Our consumers can use Codegen to auto-generate client drivers. And we have if you are interested with the Swagger community, you can also try and join the SwaggerHub. And you can also see the public REST API documentations already registered in that repository. And you can also collaborate with your teams via this platform. There's a bunch of other tools available. And then Swagger was created with a broad view in mind, which is to address every issue faced by each and every stakeholder in your API. Okay, so in short, first you just import your Swagger library, then do some bit of configuration like specifying annotations and stuff, build and run. And that's it, you're done. You just go to your HTTP, your API hostname /Swagger. So for a quick view on what it looks like, let's click on this one. This is Swagger UI. This is a visualization of the Swagger documentation that we have here, or Swagger specification. Later, I will also present it to you. In this UI, I think it's very straightforward to use. We have a list of the endpoints being defined here. And you can, not only that, you can have a look at each endpoint and see the details It's very detailed with regards to explaining the parameters, the response formats. So for example, you can do interactive testing with your REST API here. So in this case, let's try to add a new pet. We have a try it out button here. Let's indicate some ID. Let's say 1233. The name is Blackie. I'm not sure why I used Blackie there, but and click execute. So we're basically playing around with the REST API of this online pet store. This is not the UI of the online pet store, okay? So we have here the Blackie, and the ID is 1233. And then we can try to play around with the get endpoint. Let's specify the ID that we used. It's 1233. So it should give us the name Blackie. So it's there. So we'll be playing with this tool later in the examples. Let's not also forget the efforts being done by some other community with regards to documenting their APIs. So we have WSDL for web services, the very old description language in my university days. We have WADL, Web Application Description Language, for REST APIs also. We have RAML, one of the competing description languages with Swagger, as well as API Blueprint. They have sponsors that are also working together to develop and maintain these specifications. We have Google Cloud Endpoint, recently who also supported Swagger UI. We have Hydra, gRPC. They have protocol buffers. It's kind of a definition language also, very language agnostic. It allows you to generate specific code using some of their tools. And we have Apache Avro and many others. But for Swagger, the competing definition languages that are popular right now is RAML and API Blueprint. So I tried feeding these keywords into Stack Overflow tag trends. So this is what I got. We have here Swagger with the red line, the API Blueprint with the blue one, and the RAML in the green one. And we can see that from around 2012 to 2013, it starts gaining traction in the community. And then up till now, it's still having this upward trend, as a very significant difference as compared to other definition languages, on which we can see how popular Swagger has been as of nowadays. Okay, so Swagger API project was created around 2011 when Tony Tam, the co-founder of the dictionary site WordMik, felt lazy, just like us. Sometimes we feel lazy, we want to automate things. He wanted to auto-generate the documentation of their REST APIs. So he thought of creating a simple JSON representation of that API, a very simple one. One of their teams came up with the idea of having an interactive user interface. Another one of their team came up with an idea of code generator. All of these integrated in the documentation. And another one of their team came up with, guess what? The name Swagger. And the Swagger was one of the popular definition languages during the time. There was no other widely accepted REST API definition language. So the API industry's thought leaders and evangelists selected Swagger as one of the critical innovations in the REST API community. Also, helped by Apache 2.0 open source license, the products and services, online services, started using Swagger, which also helped it to gain traction. In 2015, SmartBear, who created the popular SOAP UI, also started to acquire Swagger and then created a new organization called OpenAPI Initiative, which will handle the maintaining of this Swagger specification. This new organization is composed of Google, Microsoft, IBM, other big companies, and 20 more. With further revisions on the documentation, of the specification rather, Swagger documentation has been renamed to OpenAPI Specification. That's what we're going to see later in the examples. So what is OpenAPI Specification? You have an example here. It's in a YAML format. And it's actually a standard language agnostic interface to RESTful APIs. It allows you to describe your entire API, including available endpoints and the HTTP methods in each endpoint, such as post, get, put, everything. It also allows you to define the input parameters and the response formats, authentication methods, contract information, license, other information, practically all you need to define your details of your REST API. It can be written, as you can see, it can be written using YAML. It can also be written using JSON. The one I wanted to show you earlier, but we'll see what it looks like also in JSON format. It is very easy to use because it's also highly readable by humans and machines. That's why we have existing Swagger tools that allows us to auto-generate or automate some tasks from this specification. This is a bird's eye view of all the objects or the keywords of the OpenAPI specification. And there's a link below where you can see, we can have a look at this cool interface which can allow us to browse through all the nodes, all the objects, and see what inner attributes that we can define. But we'll do that later. OK, next we're going to we're going to start creating a simple specification using some tool, Swagger editor tool. But with that, I'm going to present to you a case study before we start creating this documentation. We have Bob and Alice, who were hired to work together to create a platform for an online store. Okay, so we have two parties here. Bob's company is Web Builders, and Alice's company is Mobile Solutions. Both parties wanted to have a common service layer that allows them to access data for both web and mobile UIs. This is actually a classic case of a top-down approach where you have to start from ground zero. And if both parties wanted to agree on something, they have to start first with the documentation before they start implementing their different UIs or different applications. So first, we're going to create the documentation via Swagger editor, and then we'll try to generate the server stubs and the client drivers out of that documentation using Swagger Codegen. So let me bring you to Swagger editor. OK. Let's start from scratch. This is Swagger editor. This allows us to easily define our specification. But back in our slides, I'll just go back here. We'll take note of the keywords that I'm going to use. It's just the Swagger version, the info of your REST API, the host. Of course, the host, we need hosts to be able to test interactively with the REST API. And finally, and most essentially, the paths, the endpoints of your REST API. So let's proceed. Sorry about that. OK. All right, so first is the Swagger version. And then, as you can see, Swagger editor automatically provides us snippets to easily complete the coding of each snippet, of each object. Then we have info. So let me put some version there, 0.1. The title would be Sandwich Store. It's actually the sandwich store that they're trying to create. And then the description would be, let's say, your breakfast store at your service on weekdays. All right. So for now, we can ignore some of these keywords here. And then let's indicate the host. For now, let's just put localhost at 8080. So as you can see, the Swagger editor is also rendering a visualization of your documentation. This is something similar to the Swagger UI that we saw earlier. And it's also giving us some errors wherein it allows us to fix right away. It always debugs, it always compiles your specification from top to bottom every time you modify it. Lastly, we'll define the paths. Okay, so Bob and Alice wants to create an application for this online store, which happens to be the sandwich store. So we need items. We need items to be displayed on their front page. So let's put items. Let's define in a get method here. Oh, it should give us a snippet. Sorry. Good. There. Okay, so the summary would be get all the available items. Let's put the same thing here, available items. That's it. Let's also try to define a sample post method. Let's say a user wants to buy the item that he selected in the application. So let's define buy endpoint and also define a post method here. So the summary would be buys an item. The description would be just the same. All right, so we're actually done. How long did it take to? Okay, so we have some error at the version. It seems that we need to enclose it with quotes so that it would be treated as a string. Sorry. All right. So as you can see, we have two endpoints here, the items and the buy. But lastly, we need some response format for the item, for the items endpoint. We need some kind of an array of items. So that's the last thing we're going to define here. First, let's define the model, definitions, item of type object, and the properties would be, let's say, an ID, name, and the price, right? ID, the type of an ID would be, let's give an integer value for that. Integer. For the name, let's put string here for the type. And for the price, so the keywords for the here are very familiar, very common for the developers also. It won't be very hard for you to go through, but if you want to be familiarized with all the keywords, you definitely need to look into the OpenAPI Specification website and have one good week to look into it to be able to familiarize everything. Format, the type would be a number, but the format would be, number would be double. Okay, so finally we have established our specification. This is the very core, this is the Swagger specification, this is the very core wherein the tools will be basing on. Yes, question.
Is it possible to input some more richer content on the documentation? I don't know, a diagram or
As far as I know, you won't be able to plug in some rich content to be displayed in your Swagger UI. You can only define the endpoints, the details of your REST API, but not some examples or some extra diagrams. You might, I'm not sure if you can insert it in the descriptions though. Okay, so let's try to generate the server code. Apparently, Swagger Editor provides us these tools here. This is Swagger Codegen. And we can generate either server code and client code. For server code, you have several languages to choose from. We have ASP.NET, PHP, Rails, and for now, we'll just choose Spring because Bob happens to be well-versed on Java Spring. So let's click on that and see what it gives us. OK. So I see an icon, a jumping icon there. Let's go to our downloads. So let's have a good look at what's inside this downloaded zip file. First, I'm going to try to organize my folders here. I'm going to define server, wherein I put my server code. OK. And then let me just unzip this. OK, this is from Swagger Codegen. So if we look at what's inside this, this zip file, we have the controllers and the APIs defined here. But let's just quickly switch to Eclipse. I'm supposed to import this to Eclipse so we can easily have a good view of the files inside it. We have the Spring server, OK? And then we have the following API interfaces that are linked to the endpoints that we defined earlier. We have the by, and then the method type is post. So it's matching with the description that we created earlier. We have the items of the method type get. And I also did some tweaking of the implementing class of this controller so that it would give us some example of the items that would that it will return once we call this endpoint. So we have an item instance here with ID 234. The name is lettuce sandwich, and the price is $2. Oh, just 2.0. And then we put it in an array instance. Okay. So this code is ready to be run. Actually, we just need to do some minor change and you're good to go. Okay. And apparently, there is a running instance, so I failed to stop this one. Let's stop it for now. Okay. And then let's try to run the application again. The main entry point of this one is in Swagger Spring 2 boot. Let's ignore the errors. It's related to some extra unwanted files created by my MacBook. Okay. So our server is now running, our API server, running on port 8080. Let's try to go and see what's in localhost port 8080. Okay. Localhost 8080. So it actually gives us a Swagger UI, and it's already integrated with the server stubs generated by Swagger Editor. And then we have the by API and the items API. Very quickly, let's try to test the items. See if it returns us, if we can do interactive testing with the server stub. We just click try it out, and let's see if we can see the results. There, it gives us the single item, the lettuce sandwich. Apart from the response body, you can also see the curl command here, which you can just copy paste it into your command line or your terminal. And you also have the actual request URL. Right? So that's it. We're done with the server code. How about the client code? Okay. Yes, you can also generate client code. It actually has more languages to choose from as compared to the server code, to the server option. So for Alice, let's choose Java. We also have HTML, HTML2, .NET, C# rather, C#, .NET. So let's try Java. There are actually 40 plus languages as mentioned by in their documentation. So yeah, we were able to download, let's see. We'll go to downloads and then try to copy and put it in our workspace. We have a workspace here we created just now. Client. Okay. Then all right, so this is supposedly a client driver for the REST API. So the consumers will just play around with this code, and then let's see how it's being invoked in the test codes. So we do have a test code here, and we'll just base from here. Alice can base from this test code for invoking the REST API calls. So let's see. It's too deep. We have default API test. I've also imported it here in the Java client in Eclipse. Let's see what we have here for default API test. So this is the same code that we downloaded just now. This test code defines a test method for buy and the get. So for now, what I did is I did some minor changes. Instead of, I just added this line here, which prints out the response from calling items.get. So this is also ready to be run, actually. So let's just right-click on this one and click run the test. So again, just ignore this. It's more on the unwanted files. So we have two methods two test methods being run, but let's just look at items.get. It gives us the same value, the expected result, which is a single item instance with ID 234, name, letter, sandwich, and price. Okay, we have Java, we have the client code and the server code. We are actually done with the deliverables for this top-down approach. And what Alice and Bob can do is just they can base on the code that was being downloaded, or they can just use it right away. Just build on top of the downloaded code. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're done with case study 1. Let's move on to the next case study. There's a company named AppSpot who is outsourcing a mobile app development to mobile solutions. Alice was assigned to create a mobile app of an existing website, pseview.appspot.com. I'm sure you're familiar. For those who are familiar with AppSpot, it's actually just Google. Okay. The legacy website was created using Rails, unfortunately. So it's an existing application. It's using a different language. It doesn't have a documentation or anything. But what it has is it's a public website, and it gives us, it allows us to access some endpoints to access data. So this is actually a website for extracting data from the Philippine Stocks Exchange website. So what AppSpot wants Alice to do is to extract the company, the stocks available, the information for each stock, current price, current figures, chart information. Okay, so we have corresponding REST APIs for that. I have prepared these tabs for you guys. Okay, so we have one method here. It gives us the summary. We have stock information for PXP. Okay, so we have several calls here I have prepared, and then we will input these URLs into what does the presentation, what does it say? Let me see. Okay. Using Swagger Inspector. So this one is a case of a bottom-up approach wherein you start from the bottom and you go up. We have an existing REST API, and you just create a documentation out of it, and then finally you create the client driver. So let's use Swagger Inspector. Let's just click on this one. Okay. So this is Swagger Inspector. Let's copy-paste all the URLs that we have there earlier. Or we can just try one and see what it gives us. For now, let's copy this chart, PHP, endpoint, and, oops, sorry. And put it there. And then click send. Now it's it's testing. Oh, sorry about that. For Safari, it's actually having this CORS issues. It doesn't allow us to perform cross-origin calls to other links, to other domains. So let's use this Chrome inspector, swagger.io. And again, let's paste it here. Oh, sorry about it. I'm copying the PSE view link. And then I'm putting it here. Okay, so what does it give us? Yeah, it gives us the response. And it's actually testing and trying to extract some information for creating the documentation, or the specification rather. So for Swagger Inspector, for you to be able to use this, you need to join, you need to register into their website. But if if your project has this issue of posting confidential information in the internet, this might not be for you. Okay. So for example, let's choose one call here. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not responding. There. So you can choose several links here and then create API definition for each of the REST API calls that you did. So it's not that very automated. It doesn't scan or do some web crawling on that link on your REST API, but you have to just call them by yourself, click send, put it there, click send, and then it will be accumulated in the history. So what I'm doing right now is I selected the chart, PHP endpoint, and I click on create API definition. And then I will be able, it says here, I will be able to access my definition or my specification in SwaggerHub. That means I will need access, I will need to log in to SwaggerHub also. There. I'm being redirected to SwaggerHub now. So import Swagger from inspector. Let's say this is PSE view API 3. So it should be able to import anytime now. Okay, that's it. So we now have a specification for that REST API call. This is SwaggerHub that I introduced earlier. This is like an integrated platform for different tools that we saw earlier, code generator, inspector. It also does some validations, the same thing that Swagger editor can. So we can just define the paths, the host here, so we can do a quick test. Host would be Swagger, PSE view .appspot.com. Okay. All right, so the interactive testing is enabled now. And then I just click try. And let's see. Let's provide some sample values here. PXP, and for this one would be just 1 month. So it gives me a JSON information with regards to this specific stock and the figures from in 1 month. Okay. All right, so it's basically interactive testing. So we're done. We can copy paste this. We can generate a code, client code here also. Sorry. There, you have options to generate client code and server code. So yeah, that's it for the bottom-up approach. So we're down to our last 2 slides. How to integrate into .NET. So we haven't covered yet some .NET codes. So what I'm going to do is just use ASP.NET. I'm going to import swashbuckle.aspnet core and then update startup.cs to call Swagger enabling methods. So we import this library in the NuGet packages. So I've prepared here a Visual Studio. Maybe you want to start from scratch. Sorry. I can't see my screen. Let's say, let's start with a new solution, ASP.NET. Project name is Sandwich. Okay. Which sandwich? Sorry about that. Okay, just Sandwich. Okay, so we have a new project, and then the next thing you're going to do is to add packages in the new, okay. Just type in swashbuckle, ASP.NET Core, and then it says here we have a available package. It contains Swagger tools for documenting APIs. Then let's add the package. Okay. And then while doing that, let's have a view at the controller. Let's try to customize something here and see if we can test it when we launch Swagger UI. Let's say available items are lettuce, and we have ham and cheese. $4, right? .NET people are richer. It's not open source. Okay, so we have successfully added the package. We also have modified some controllers here, the default controller. Finally, let's modify startup.cs to enable Swagger UI. So I have prepared here a snippet too. We just changed this class. Let's copy the add Swagger gen. Copy this one, and then given that you have already defined your other REST API, this is the only thing that you're going to do to enable Swagger. Finally, let's copy the using of Swagger and the Swagger UI. Okay. And that's it. Let's try to run and see if it gives us Swagger UI. Oh, sorry about that. This new object needs to be imported. Let's do a quick fix using swashbuckle. Okay. Let's try to run again. All right, so it's running. It says build successful, and it should launch an instance. And we can see that our API is up and running. So how to access that one? Let's just specify Swagger. Or you can also customize that URL in your code. So let's try to play around with the values. It should give us the same thing: lettuce, ham, and cheese. Click execute. That's it. That's basically how you're going to import Swagger documentation in .NET applications. So for Java, you have seen Java earlier. I'm not sure how to automate this. That was the hotkey. Okay, for Java, we have several libraries that you can use, JAX-RS, Spring, some other libraries I'm not sure yet. But for Spring, you can just import these libraries into your POM XML. We have SpringFox Swagger 2 and SpringFox Swagger UI, and then add the annotation at enable Swagger to your main class. Okay, so yeah. The next time you want to create your applications and then want to document it, specifically REST API, you can try Swagger. Okay. Yes, question.
How does interactive testing work if you have basic authentication?
For basic authentication, you can configure in the documentation to indicate the authentication type, if it's basic or if it's OAuth2, and you can actually provide the keys that it requires you to do. You actually don't need to code it in the definition. Swagger UI will ask you to input it before you can start testing. Okay. Actually, that is the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time. Well, any questions?
Don't go. We'll have to have the survey.